In the time when the gods strode high upon the branches of Yggdrasil and the realms had not yet crumbled into twilight, there was born to Thor a second son, me, whose name meant wrath or courage, depending on how the winds of the world turned when it was spoken. Unlike the loud celebrations that followed the birth of Magni, the mighty lifter of Hrungnir's corpse, Mia's birth was a quiet one, tucked in the shadow of thunder and fire. His mother was not the famed Jarnsaxa, but a lesser-known figure of the divine, either a quiet Asinja of stormy skies or a frost-touched Jotun whose name is now lost to ash. She gave birth under a silver storm cloud, far from Asgard's golden halls, while Thor roared across the 9 realms, unaware that another thread had been spun into his legacy. Me did not cry when he emerged. His eyes opened with the silence of pressure building deep inside the earth, and his heart pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like the calm before a storm. His mother wrapped him in silence and gave him no songs. She knew what his name would mean. As he grew, me was ever still, ever watching. While Magni threw boulders and raced wind itself, me would stand beside the anvil where Mjolnir sparked with fire and intent, staring into the glow. He did not hunger for praise, nor the eyes of the gods. His fury was not one of chaos, but of containment, a strength coiled tight beneath flesh and blood. He was the unspoken answer to provocation, the hand that clenched but did not strike. The gods rarely spoke of him. Odin, who kept secrets like weapons, watched me with suspicion, noting the flicker of Jotun blood behind his eyes. Freya called him a forge flame, dangerous when stoked, but vital in darkness. Even Thor, his father, often favored Magni, the open flame, the roar in battle. But in rare, fleeting moments, Thor would look to me and see something heavier, deeper. Not the child who would lift a mountain, but the one who would carry its weight. Me wandered the edges of the divine halls, neither fully within the golden realm of Asgard nor cast out into Jotunheim's frost. He trained in silence, clashing with shadows, building strength not for applause, but for necessity. When rage came to him, and it came often, it was met not with eruption, but with steel. He turned fury into focus, tempering himself like a blade that chooses when to strike. Among the Aesir, he was a whisper. Among mortals, a myth within myth. But in the secret halls of fate, the Norns carved his name beside his brother's, not behind it. For me, son of Thor, was born not to dazzle the world with strength, but to survive it. And in the distant future, when the skies would burn and gods would fall, it would be me, silent, steady, storm-forged, who would remain standing. He was wrath, not unleashed, but endured. He was courage, not shouted, but lived. And though the world forgot him in life, it would remember him in the end. As me grew from quiet boy to watchful youth, the golden walls of Asgard no longer gleamed with childish awe, but pulsed with warning. His days spent trailing behind Thor's long shadow became lessons in contrast, his father's thunderous presence crashing against Mia's own still, burning silence. While Magni was praised for his booming laughter and feats of might, me learned to endure, to sharpen the edge of restraint into something stronger than impulse. Whispers of war stirred across the 9 realms like embers on the wind. Frost giants stirred in Jotunheim's depths, serpents twisted in the world's roots, and mortal cries for protection grew louder beneath the Bifrost's glimmering span. The gods prepared for battle with feasts and blades, but me listened not to songs of glory, but to the cracks forming in the fabric of fate. In solitude, he trained, not to match Magni's brute power, but to harness something more elusive, the fire within his chest that begged to break free. Rage had always lived in him, an inheritance of thunder and giant blood, but he refused to let it consume him. Instead, he honed it, rage turned inward, channeled through discipline, chiseled into purpose. He became a vessel not of wrath unbound, but of wrath controlled. Each clang of Mjolnir in the forges echoed like a prophecy. Each silence he endured in the halls of the Aesir steeled his resolve. He began to see beyond the petty rivalries and praises of gods. He saw the trembling edges of Ragnarök already creeping through the corners of time. And with that vision came a decision, not to be defined by what he lacked in attention, but by what he endured in patience.
He would not seek the spotlight.
He would not beg for Odin's favor. But when the sky split and fate called for those who could stand amid ruin, me would rise, not as his father's shadow, but as a storm forged in silence. In the high realm of Asgard, where gods feasted on glory and tales echoed louder than deeds, me walked in silence. He was born with thunder in his blood, a pulse that mirrored the storm his father summoned with each swing of Mjolnir. From the beginning, he had felt it under his skin. The tremor of wrath, the heat that coiled in his gut, the urge to strike when insulted, to roar when challenged. It was the fire of Thor, raw and ancient. But me was not his father. He learned early that strength untempered was a wildfire. In battle training, when fellow gods in arms tested him, he struck not to crush, but to redirect. When a sparring partner mocked him for being slower to anger than Magni, me did not retaliate. He took the insult like a stone to the chest and let it sit there, heavy but unmoved. It was not weakness. It was mastery. He fought his anger every day, not with fists, but with stillness. In the quiet hours before dawn, he would sit atop the cliffs overlooking Bifrost, letting the winds of the realms swirl around him while he breathed deeply, steadily, keeping the storm at bay. He did not fear his rage. He understood it, and in understanding he controlled it. And yet, among the gods, his calm drew wary glances. They did not know what to make of him. A son of Thor, who did not boast. A warrior who did not revel in his victories. Even Odin kept a distant eye on him, unsure whether Mia's silence was wisdom or a warning. The All-Father, ever wary of what could not be predicted, whispered doubts to others. A son of thunder who refuses to thunder. What else does he hide? Me felt the weight of their suspicion. Even in halls filled with laughter and mead, he sat apart, never fully embraced nor entirely cast out. But he bore it without bitterness. Solitude was not foreign to him. It was where he sharpened himself, where he turned pain into patience. There were times the fury rose unbidden. When he saw injustices overlooked in the mortal realm, when other gods fought over power instead of protecting what mattered. The storm would rise behind his ribs, and his knuckles would go white as he held it in. And sometimes, when battle did come and the world demanded blood, me unleashed himself, not in blind rage, but with precision and purpose. On the field, he moved like a tempest given shape, controlled, efficient, devastating. His foes did not see madness in his eyes. They saw focus. Mercy even. The gods began to speak of him differently. Not as a thunderer like Thor, not as a titan like Magni, but as a force that chose when to rise. He did not become a leader through charm or fury, but through certainty. Through the quiet assurance that when others fell to pride, he would stand in the breach. In time, mortals whispered prayers to him not in desperation, but in hope. Warriors asked for his calm before battle. Farmers invoked his patience during storms. His name was not shouted in the mead halls, but carved into the hearts of those who valued protection over spectacle. Me had conquered the rage in his blood not by silencing it, but by giving it meaning. He became the protector who fought when he must, not when he could. Not the loudest of the gods, but the one who endured longest. The storm that waited, the fire that watched, the wrath turned will. The 9 realms began to tremble beneath the weight of prophecy. From the dark roots of Yggdrasil to the shimmering halls of Asgard, whispers of Ragnarök crept like frost across the branches of the world. Fimbulwinter had begun, 3 endless winters with no summer in between. Crops withered, kin turned on kin, and the stars blinked out, one by one. The gods could feel the world fraying. Me stood at the edge of it all, older now, his face shaped not by time, but by restraint. The rage that once boiled inside him had settled into something deeper, an ember that glowed steady, ready. Years of struggle, of silence, had forged in him a strength that did not crack under pressure. It held, but even he could not deny what was coming. As the wolves Skoll and Hati chased the sun and moon toward their inevitable end, the halls of Asgard swelled with tension. Gods sharpened their weapons. Valkyries sang their last songs. And Thor, ever the bringer of thunder, prepared for the battle he had always known was destined. Beside him stood his sons. Magni, towering, confident, Mjolnir's thunder echoing in his blood like a war drum. Me, quiet as the deep, calm as the eye of a storm, with restraint sharpened into resolve. They were not children anymore. They were heirs of a dying world. In the twilight hours before the final clash, me walked through Asgard's fading golden light. He passed the shattered statues, the crumbling temples, the silence of gods too proud to speak their fear. He saw the fear in their eyes, masked by rage or laughter, but they're all the same. And still, he did not waver. He found Magni on the training fields, lightning dancing in his fists. Without words, they stood together and looked beyond the horizon, where fire and frost would meet, where giants would rise, where Fenrir would break free and Jormungandr would uncoil. Their bond, forged in contrast, held firm. Me felt the fury in his chest again, rising like it had in youth. But now he knew what to do with it. He did not fight to prove himself. He fought because the world needed one who could endure, not just conquer. Ragnarök would come. The gods would fall. But he and Magni would stand. Not as sons of Thor. Not as symbols of might. But as survivors. As the last sparks of a storm not yet finished. As brothers ready to face the end and rebuild from its ashes. The sky cracked open like an old wound. Flames from Muspelheim lit the heavens, and frost from Jotunheim bled across the plains. The Bifrost was shattered. The stars were gone. And beneath a sky heavy with ash and fate, the final battle of Ragnarök began. Me stood at the edge of Vigrid, where the armies of gods and monsters collided. His dark eyes did not blink at the chaos before him, serpents with eyes like burning suns, giants taller than trees, wolves with breath that froze the air. He stood beside his father, Thor, and his brother, Magni, both ready with Mjolnir and courage forged in thunder. He carried no famed weapon, only a thick forged axe that hummed in his grip, bound with runes of silence and strength. The first wave struck like a storm. Me did not roar, he moved. His axe cleaved through the sinew of chaos, his steps unshaken. Magni raged beside him, thunder in his limbs, a god made to break armies. Thor was a tempest of lightning and wrath, Mjolnir carving a path through the giant horde, his beard soaked in blood and storm. And me, silent me, was everywhere they were not. Striking where the lines broke, shielding the weak, felling the faceless beasts that would take the sky. The world serpent rose, its breath poisoning the wind. Fenrir howled, and the earth answered with a quake that split mountains. Heimdall fell. Freyr screamed beneath Surtur's blade. Gods died with dignity, some with defiance. Others simply disappeared beneath the waves of flame and shadow. But me fought on. He reached his father just as Thor crushed Jormungandr's skull with Mjolnir. The god of thunder staggered back, poisoned. Me saw it, the stumble, the slow fall. The way Thor clutched at the hammer, then at nothing. And then his father dropped to one knee. Magni screamed and charged forward, but it was me who caught Thor's collapsing form, lowering the god to the broken earth. There were no words. Thor's eyes, once full of storm and arrogance, met his son's, full of a quiet love that had long gone unsaid. And then he was gone. The thunder ceased. In that silence, something cracked in me. For the first and only time in his life, the rage he had buried, tempered, and mastered erupted. He stood, eyes burning with sorrow and fire, and let out a cry that split the battlefield. It wasn't a war cry. It was grief. It was loss. It was the sound of a son who had held his fury too long, now set ablaze. And the storm answered him. Lightning not born of Mjolnir, but of the bloodline itself, surged through me. The axe he wielded glowed with ancient light. His steps shook the ground. He tore through Surtur's legions like a scythe through grain. No force could stand against him. Not frost, nor fire, nor steel. Giants who had once mocked him for his silence fell to their knees before his wrath. The battlefield turned red beneath his feet. But even in his fury, Me did not lose himself. He did not become chaos. His vengeance was precise. Every strike a cry for the world he once knew. Every blow a promise made to his fallen father. When the sky fell and the seas swallowed the land, Me stood bloodied and breathless beside Magni, the only other left of their line. The flames receded. The howls faded. The gods were dead. The world had burned. And yet Me lived. He knelt once more at Thor's side, the ruins of Mjolnir between them. His eyes no longer burned, but they glowed with something else, the strength of sorrow, the power of restraint, and the courage of one who had faced the end and refused to break. Ragnarök had come. The world had ended. But Me endured. When the fires of Ragnarök at last smoldered into silence, the world was left scarred and still. Ash covered the sky, and the ground lay broken beneath it, split by battles of gods and monsters, soaked in the blood of divinities. Trees once sacred stood charred stumps. Rivers ran black. The wind no longer carried the sounds of birds or song, only the echo of what had been lost. And in the middle of this ruin stood Me and Magni. The sons of Thor were no longer boys bound to legacy. They were survivors of the storm, shaped not just by blood but by fire and death. Me, his axe still strapped to his back, looked out across the bones of the world, his face unreadable. Beside him, Magni held the broken haft of Mjolnir, his great hands streaked with soot and silence. There was no victory to speak of. The enemy had fallen, but so too had their fathers, their kin, and the 9 realms as they had known them. Gods of wisdom, of beauty, of war and peace, gone. The halls of Asgard had crumbled, and the golden gates lay buried beneath stone and time. And in that silence, the brothers walked. They wandered first to the shattered plain of Vigrid, where their father had drawn his last breath. They buried Thor not with rites or a pyre. There was no one left to recite the old verses, but with stone and silence. Me marked the grave with a jagged head of Mjolnir, half sunken in the earth, a symbol of what once was. Days passed without count. There was no sun to rise, no moon to fall. Only a pale, glowing haze filtered through the smoke-choked heavens. Magni spoke rarely. When he did, his voice carried grief like thunder held back behind clouds. But Me said nothing at all. Instead, he searched, not for enemies, not for vengeance, but for meaning. He climbed to the tallest surviving cliff and stared across the skeletal horizon. He walked through the ruins of Midgard, where humanity had once lit fires and told tales. He stood at the banks of rivers where gods once bathed, and now only ghosts lingered in the mist. The world was empty, but not dead, and that mattered. In their solitude, the brothers began to rebuild, not palaces or temples, but small signs of order. A stone ring where rituals might one day be held. A path cleared through the ash where new travelers might walk. They spoke to no one but each other. Yet even in that quiet, something stirred beneath the earth and within their hearts. Me no longer wrestled with his fury. He had burned through it in the fires of Ragnarök. What remained was forged resolve, the strength to protect not for glory, but for peace. To build a world their father would never see, but one he had died to make possible. He and Magni did not seek to rule. They sought to remember. And in the silence after the end of all things, in the company of ghosts and ash, the sons of Thor stood tall, not as heirs to the past, but as guardians of whatever came next. When the smoke of Ragnarök finally thinned and the sky no longer bled fire, what remained was not a world. It was a wound. The branches of Yggdrasil, once spanning all realms, had withered. Asgard was a memory buried under rubble and silence. The halls of the gods were empty, their voices lost to the storm. Yet 2 figures still walked among the ruins, Me and Magni, sons of Thor. Their bodies bore the marks of battle. Burns, bruises, scars not yet healed. But their eyes bore something heavier, the memory of fire, of loss, of the last time they saw their father fall, Mjolnir slipping from his grasp. In the stillness that followed the god's extinction, the brothers wandered not as princes of divine blood, but as orphans of a shattered cosmos. At first, they walked in silence. Magni, whose strength could split stone and raise mountains, carried what relics remained: the broken hammer of Thor, the charred scraps of a red cloak, and the bone-white haft of Hrungnir's horse, Gulfaxi. Me walked behind, his hands empty, but his mind full. He listened to the wind, to the low hum of the earth trying to breathe again. Then, one day, they heard a voice. Not divine. Human. A cry in the distance, a child's voice, hoarse with dust and fear. Magni rushed forward, tearing through fallen trees and ruin-strewn paths. He found a small boy and girl huddled beside their dead kin, ash covering their hair like frost. Without words, Magni lifted them gently. And behind him, me knelt, placing his hand on their shoulders, eyes closed, a silent promise forming in his heart. They were not the only ones. In time, more survivors emerged, wandering spirits, battered mortals, lost Vanir, and even reformed Jotnar. All had suffered. All had lost. But me, with a voice soft as twilight and a presence calm as winter ice, welcomed them not with orders, but with understanding. While Magni cleared forests and raised stone walls from ruin, me rebuilt hearts. He listened to grief like a priest, guided quarrels like a chieftain, and walked among the people not as a god above them, but as one who had survived beside them. Where Magni protected the people with force, me held them together with wisdom. Though few words passed between the brothers, their bond deepened in the quiet. When Magni's grief boiled over and he would strike the earth in frustration, me was the one who stood beside him, not to stop him, but to share the storm. When me stared too long into the horizon, haunted by the end of the old world, Magni was the one who broke the silence with firewood, a simple gesture to bring warmth back into the night. Together, they became balance. In this new age, one born not of glory, but of survival, me emerged as the quiet compass of the rebuilding world. He taught restraint to warriors who had only ever known revenge. He bridged the distrust between surviving Aesir and the humbled Jotnar. He reminded those around him that power was not what saved them from Ragnarök. Wisdom was. No longer just wrath. His name came to mean something deeper. The courage to feel, to lead without dominating, to protect without conquering. Where Thor had been thunder, me was the voice that followed, reverberating long after the storm had passed. And so, among the ashes of gods and the bones of giants, a new world slowly stirred. Not a world of gods ruling over mortals, but a realm shaped by those who had lost everything and still chose to build. Me and Magni did not sit on thrones. They walked the land, guardians of a world reborn. One with the strength of mountains, the other with the wisdom of still water. In them, the legacy of Thor lived on, not as war, but as protection. Not as fear, but as hope. As the years passed and the embers of Ragnarök faded into memory, the shattered realms slowly wove themselves into something new, different, quieter, less divine. No golden halls stood gleaming atop the clouds. No thunder cracked the skies by command. Yet in the hush of the dawn winds and in the strength of the earth, the legacy of the old gods lived on, not through glory or conquest, but through those who endured. Me, once merely a shadow behind his mighty brother Magni, became something greater, not a ruler, not a god to be worshipped, but a symbol. He never sought a throne in the new world. While others whispered of rebuilding Valhalla or reforging Asgard, me walked among the people. He wandered village to village, settlement to settlement, listening more than speaking. His presence brought calm. His silence brought comfort. And when he did speak, his words carried the weight of storm wrath withheld, grief tempered by wisdom, and the solemn strength of one who had borne the fire of endings and chosen not to burn with it. Children grew up hearing stories of the god with quiet eyes, who once stood at the edge of the world as it fell, who held the broken pieces of fate and shaped them into something whole. Warriors spoke his name before battle, not to summon rage, but to call upon the courage to fight with purpose, not anger. Elders invoked his memory in times of strife, reminding their people that restraint can be greater than wrath. Magni, ever the shield and hammer of the new world, built it with his hands. Me built it with his heart. Though they were brothers, they became archetypes of the balance the world now needed: force and wisdom, power and compassion. And in time, Mia's presence took on a deeper, mythic tone. He was no longer just a god among men. He became a guiding ideal. Not a warlord, but a guardian of restraint. Not a conqueror, but a keeper of inner fire. It is said that Mi never aged like the others. That he walked the world for generations, appearing in places where war threatened to return, where vengeance began to overshadow justice. He would arrive in silence, eyes calm and deep, and through his presence alone, bloodshed was stayed. No sword was needed, only the example of one who had held divine rage in his blood and never let it rule him. In the great tapestries of the New World, Mi stood not atop mountains or amidst lightning, but beneath trees, beside rivers, among people. And in that simplicity, his greatness echoed across ages. In the end, Mia's legacy was not in the might he inherited from Thor, but in the choice he made: to rise beyond wrath, to wield strength through restraint, and to become the emotional backbone of a world still learning to live again. And so, long after the gods had fallen and the world had remade itself, Mi endured, not as the thunder, but as the silence that steadies after the storm. In the quiet that followed the storm of Ragnarök, time itself seemed to move differently. The old rhythms of the gods had broken, and the world now beat with a slower, more human heart. Out of this silence rose the final journey of Mi, son of Thor, the one who had never sought glory, but found immortality in restraint. Mi did not vanish like so many others. He walked the scarred land with steady steps, his eyes holding the weight of fire long subdued. The hammer-wielder remained with Magni, and the halls of the gods lay in ruins, but Mi bore something far heavier: memory. He became a witness, a living archive of the old world's end and the quiet birth of something new. He helped where he was needed, not as a builder or a warrior, but as a foundation of thought. When the scattered survivors, elves, mortals, the remnants of lesser gods, gathered to form councils, to ask what kind of order should rise from the wreckage, it was Mi they turned to. He did not dominate the halls of debate, nor speak often. But when he did, his words shaped futures. He urged them to build not in the image of Asgard, but beyond it. Let power serve the many, not the few. Let courage mean more than conquest. Let the next age of the world learn from the mistakes that shattered the last. It was Mi who kept the volatile remnants of divine ambition from repeating the cycle. His presence alone reminded others that true strength was not in unleashing fury, but in choosing when not to. Generations passed, and still Mi walked. Never aging, never ruling, always guiding. To the young gods born of this new world, he was a quiet mentor. To mortals, he was a distant legend who might appear by a fire at night to offer a story or a warning. They called him the calm thunder, for though he carried the storm within him, he never let it break the sky again. Some say Mi helped write the first laws of the new age. Others claim he forged no sword, but ensured those who did understood the cost of steel. Still others believe he simply watched the world with sorrowful wisdom, ensuring balance, like a guardian spirit whose duty was never finished. One day, Mi vanished from the lands. Not in death, for gods like him do not die easily, but in stillness. The last sighting was at the peak of a ruined mountain, where he sat beneath the stars, gazing not at what had been lost, but at what had been born. There, he disappeared into wind and stone, as if the world itself had accepted him as part of its bones. But his name did not fade. In every tale of peace kept, of fury tempered, of warriors choosing mercy over blood, Mi lived. In temples carved from ashwood and in oaths sworn beneath broken sky, his legacy endured. Not as a god of war, but as a god of strength held in check. Of wrath turned to purpose. Of thunder, tamed. And so the world remembered him, not as the loudest voice of the divine, nor the most visible, but as the one who held the storm together, who bore the weight of fire and passed it on not as destruction, but as light. Me, son of Thor, became the pulse of the new world, the steady, enduring rhythm beneath it all.